Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Nicole DeFoss. I'm your crypto attorney. And today I will be hosting all the way from Roatan Bay Islands, Honduras. I am based in Florida. I'm a crypto attorney, but originally from Honduras. So I'm very excited to be transmitting from my home country. As a guest speaker today, we have Josh. Josh, you want to take it away and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Josh Hale. I'm an attorney in the space as well. I've been in the space for several years and in the startup space for nearly 20. I am licensed in Ohio and California. And unlike Nicole, I am not transmitting from Honduras. I'm just doing it from Ohio. So thank you for having me on, Nicole.
My pleasure, Josh. Let's take it away. So let's start with something that we're all familiarized with, currency. Traditional currency, just like the dollar, the yen, the lempira. Instead of having a traditional currency, we have a digital currency. It has the same effect as the normal currency that we know, with the difference that because it's digital, you cannot touch it. You do not store it in a bank. You store it in your crypto wallet. And you also don't have to use a middleman for any type of transaction. So the benefits of having cryptocurrency is that instead of having to wait 2 3 days for a transaction to reflect, the transaction in cryptocurrency works as fast as your web browser were allowed to. So it's just currency like you know it in a traditional sense, but in a digital form. Now, what can we expect from cryptocurrency? We are now seeing mass adoption from financial institutions like JP Morgan, like MasterCard, and we're also seeing adoption from multi billion dollar retail companies like Prada, like Gucci, like Nike. And some of these examples of adoption are, for instance, in Argentina, we're seeing MasterCard that is now being MasterCard is being partnered with Binance to have a credit card that is cryptocurrency credit card. What this credit card does is that allows you to buy digital assets and physical assets using cryptocurrency. And it also has the ability to go to an ATM and cash out fiat money. Fiat is the normal currency from your cryptocurrency savings in that credit card. Now, the end question for all of this is cryptocurrency transactions, crypto investment, is it legal? Is a transaction legal? Is it like how does it work? Josh, could you tell us a little bit about the legalities about around it?
Sure. So the base understanding of crypto is currently worldwide. There's really only one jurisdiction that has completely said we don't want crypto, which is China. Um, China very specifically is building their own currency that is going to be a digital currency, and they don't want competition in the market. In the United States, as well as Europe and Latin America, right now, while crypto is a little bit of the Wild West, it is generally considered legal, and it's just not always what we would call legal tender. It's not something that you're going to, for example, when I lived in Tijuana, it's not something I was going to the taco stand to buy my tacos with. It's it's a tender of which, a lot of times it's B2B sort of tender that is growing into other places. In fact, it started growing into a lot of other places in the past year, including some countries. So generally speaking, crypto is legal in most places, but not all.
Definitely. Alrighty. So let me see 1 second here. All right. So some of the things that we need to watch out when it comes to crypto transaction and legalities is the jurisdiction. So oftentimes, many people think that because we're dealing with crypto transactions, we are jurisdictionless, and some of the reasoning behind it is because we live in the blockchain. Crypto lives in the blockchain. Transactions are registered in the blockchain, and there is a very big misconception that because we're in the blockchain, we're jurisdictionless, but that's not quite true. For instance, if you have a US based
Nicole, I think you're on mute.
am I muted?
No, I can hear you, Nicole. Somebody can't hear you for whatever reason.
All right, give me 1 second. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So I was saying, so for instance, the example of the U.S. being having a company that is U.S. incorporated, and then you want to operate in, say, Honduras with cryptocurrency, you have to follow both laws. You have to follow U.S. jurisdiction, and you have to follow Honduras jurisdiction. Now, there's a tricky part here because the U.S. has a couple of guidelines, it has regulations, it has parameters that we need to follow. But Honduras, on the other hand, has no crypto legislation in place. We don't have as much regulation, if at all. So what we have to do if you were to invest in Honduras with cryptocurrency using a US based company is to use the domestic laws of Honduras and apply them to your crypto transaction. This is a very tricky situation because we're not used to applying the law to an area that is not necessarily applicable to. But the fact that Honduras has no crypto legislation doesn't mean that you come and invest in Honduras and you just lawless and do investments and crypto transactions. You still have to abide by the law and adapt that law to your transactions. Now, some of the countries that are crypto friendly are, for instance, Panama, Portugal, and what's the other one? Um, there's another one: Panama, Portugal, and
Yeah,
the UK.
Marshall Islands has some stuff, UK,
Yeah, UK.
Singapore for some things.
Right.
There's friendly places all over the place, but they're friendly for different reasons too, which
True.
is why attorneys end up being so important.
Definitely. So, Josh, you want to walk us through some of the jurisdictions that are not as friendly?
Yeah, so right now, one of the countries that people really have a problem with jurisdictionally is the United States. Why is that? Well, the United States doesn't have a whole lot of laws written for crypto. However, we have a lot of laws. And what does that mean? It means get an attorney involved because you want to make sure that you are at least trying to follow the local ordinances, whether it's, dealing with the state of New York, which has a lot of stuff when it comes to crypto. Um, California is starting to. And then you have other states like Wyoming and Texas that are trying to be the opposite and be more friendly. So every state can be different, even though the country as a whole may not have the legislation that we currently hope for. Other jurisdictions that are not friendly are, obviously, like I talked about, China. They don't want any crypto within the country. That includes Bitcoin. Now, how do they control Bitcoin? They kind of can't. That's not really the way it's designed or made, but they can prevent usage of getting to the places that allow those transactions to happen by keeping their internet locked down. Um, Ultimately, though, the countries that are unfriendly are not unfriendly like China as a whole. It's specific things that you're doing. Like right now, Singapore, for example, just announced earlier this year that pretty much all crypto is going to be, for Singapore purposes, probably a security, of which, in order to trade in those securities, you're going to have to be on a security platform within Singapore. Does that make them unfriendly? Possibly. India, for example, has also just announced, not just, but they were announcing earlier this year that crypto transactions were going to be taxed at a rate of 30% for all transactions. Whether or not that ever happened, I've got people on the ground in India that say, sometimes it's the way it functions, sometimes not. But ultimately, 30% transaction on anything is a huge deal. So does that make them unfriendly? Guess it depends on what you're doing, I think.
Yeah, it definitely depends on what are you looking for in certain jurisdictions because, like you're
Right.
saying, some jurisdictions are just tax friendly. Like I know Puerto Rico is tax friendly in the U.S., but it may not be the jurisdiction that you're looking for other purposes.
Well, the Netherlands right now is very interesting because they're very tax friendly to crypto. Same thing with Portugal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where you want to build a project. But to live there might be a really wise idea. That it all depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to do. If you're trying to start a business, you're going to get one piece of advice. If you're trying to find out where you should live, you may get another.
Definitely, I agree. Totally agree. Now, let's talk a little bit about legal tender. Legal tender, we've heard a couple of countries who have taken cryptocurrency as their legal tender, but some other countries have not. One of those countries is Honduras. At the beginning of this year, Honduras was having intentions of, well, considering having cryptocurrency be a legal tender. But by like mid this year, June, July, the Central Bank of Honduras decided that they would not vouch for cryptocurrency transactions and that it wouldn't be the legal tender of the country. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because what it means is that Honduras is taking baby steps into adopting crypto transactions. For instance, a good example of these is we have a crypto project right now that is like a test project. It's called Bitcoin Valley, located in a small town on the outside skirts of a city. The small town's name is Santa Lucia. This crypto project is the way it works is they chose 60 small business owners to receive payment in Bitcoin in cryptocurrency. And they are using a Guatemalan exchange platform called CoinKayaks. I think I'm pronouncing it that the right way. So the CoinKayaks platform, what it does, it receives a payment in Bitcoin, but it transfers fiat money to the small business owners. It transfers lempiras to the small business owners. And the reasoning behind it is that they don't want to transfer the volatility of cryptocurrency into small business owners. That would then affect their economy and probably crash their business altogether. But this is a good way, and it's a good sign from a Honduran government to say, hey, we're open to exploring cryptocurrency. We're just not sure our economy is ready to take it full in as a legal tender. So we're launching this project. We're taking it baby steps, and we're letting business owners adjust to the transition of having, cryptocurrency dollars and the local currency as their way of payments. Now, a different way of seeing this, and like the opposite side of the spectrum, is El Salvador. So El Salvador has cryptocurrency as their legal tender. This is good, but it's also bad. It's at the beginning of this year, Honduras was having intentions of, well, considering having cryptocurrency be a legal.
So El Salvador this year, what they ended up doing was saying that Bitcoin is legal tender for El Salvador purposes. They've created a wallet in El Salvador that transacts in Bitcoin, and that's called Chivas. And literally, the idea there is this secondary currency beyond the US dollar, because they actually transact in the US dollar in El Salvador, is also considered currency for purposes of El Salvador. Why is that important? It's the same idea of what Honduras is doing, but it's done at grand scale. It's done for the entire country. Why does that become, a problem? Well, when they first bought into it, Bitcoin was at nearly $70,000. Bitcoin currently is at $20,000. So, it was done on the basis of creating, a way for the country to get away from the whole world, fiat regime and to have their own regime based on decentralized Bitcoin. Ultimately, though, what they didn't take into account was that Bitcoin was at its high when they started the project, and now obviously it's much lower. Will it come back? There's lots of arguments for and against. I personally think probably, but in the meantime, just like what Nicole was saying, while they're waiting for it to come back, a lot of people can go hungry if you're dealing with volatility of that token, and people are not looking at that token as, hey, this is what it cost for a pupusa in El Salvador. It's a single satoshi, which is like the smallest unit of count in Bitcoin. If they're not looking at it that way, then ultimately what they're doing is saying, this is all designed around the dollar, and that ends up creating its own volatility in and of itself.
So another thing that should be considered when when making Bitcoin the legal tender is that the country's ability to borrow money from international markets will also be affected along with the volatility of the crypto market. So that's something very delicate and that should be considered before making cryptocurrency legal tender. Josh, you want to talk about a little bit of the central, the CBDC?
Yeah, that's a central bank digital currencies. It's really very much started in many ways by China, and China did it by locking down all crypto. Um, but ultimately, they're saying the digital yuan is exactly the same as a physical yuan. What does that mean? Well, they have the biggest, what they call a super app, probably in the world in China, called WeChat. And if you're familiar with Facebook, think about Facebook being Facebook on steroids and possibly with government intervention as well. So they're using on WeChat and on another one of their apps, which I forget the name of right this second, this digital yuan for anything that you can think of, buying, your food, buying your dinner, buying whatever you're doing. And that is a central bank digital currency of which you can also deposit into your bank account. What happens elsewhere? Well, currently on the market in South Africa, Nigeria, Venezuela, Anguilla, Grenada, St. Lucia, Dominica, Montserrat, St. Kitts, and Nevis, a bunch of places. You have other places making digital currency, including a offering in the EU. And what does that mean? That means that you have a large section of the market in cryptocurrency that may have countries wanting to compete with it, which is what's called a stable token. So we have a situation here in crypto of countries wanting to control their fiat, yet on the crypto side, we have this idea that everything should be decentralized, and decentralized is a magic word. Well, the central bank digital currency basically says we now have a way to control crypto within our countries. And more specifically, our currency is the only stable token within our borders. So it allows a country to have more power over crypto in their own country. Ultimately, 105 countries are currently looking at CBDCs, which is more than half the world. So this is not something that's going to go away. This is something that countries are looking at. And more specifically, eventually you're going to be thinking about CBDCs on when you're doing a transacting, getting a pizza. You may not be using your debit card anymore. You may be using, uh, US CBDC to your pizza shop, right? And how that ends up working worldwide, nobody yet knows. This is all an experiment, even between all these countries and more than probably 80% of the world's population.
Josh, I have a question for you. Would you think that the CBDC would be a solution for all the fearful individuals out there that say are afraid of having no like solid how can you put it, like for instance with the CBDC you have a one for one, right? So the bank has $1 for each cryptocurrency that they create, but with other cryptocurrencies it's just volatile, like there's very little we can do about what's being backed up by that cryptocurrency. So do you think that CBDC would solve that fear of individuals investing in crypto?
It could, but there's also a new fear that comes into the play of crypto. It allows more people to get into the overall mass adoption of crypto for sure, but it also gives Big Brother access to everything you're doing. Because if let's say in the United States, which is where I'm at, the United States enacts its own CBDC, every transaction that I pay they would be able to see. So I buy a pizza, they see it. Today, I can still today pay for a pizza with cash money, meaning paper money, of which nobody but the pizza shop and I know that that transaction has happened. And it's the pizza shop's job to say they earned that money. It's not my job to tell everybody, hey, I bought a pizza. So there's a lot of big brother aspects of CBDCs, but ultimately, yeah, I think it brings a lot more people into the crypto markets. And I think you see a lot more speculation based off of, I just received my entire paycheck in, US dollars, I'm going to go buy Dogecoin. Like you see that sort of speculation, which is maybe not healthy for the market. But you also see people that want to buy Bitcoin. You see people that want to buy, things that have hopefully real world utility. So the answer is it fixes things and breaks others, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a hit or miss. Like one thing gets good, but then you're missing out on some others. I think it's a matter of time. Now, speaking of that, we have a couple of regulations and compliance that we need to follow when dealing with crypto transactions. If you're a crypto investor and you're dealing with crypto, not maybe not on the daily basis, but you have crypto investments or you're intending to go into crypto, these are some of the acronyms that you'll see as like SEC, KYC, FTC, BSA, and AML. So a little bit about each one of those. The SEC is a regulatory body of the United States that regulates securities. They're still on the very gray area as to providing clear guidance on what constitutes a security within the crypto world, what constitutes a security when we have an NFT project. Now, from my personal experience as a crypto attorney, I've seen very clear line when it comes to NFTs fractionalization. And recently, interestingly so, I saw some SEC concerns regarding royalties, maybe not in a direct manner, but on the collateral aspect. So what the SEC is usually portraying is okay, if it talks like a security, smells like a security, it looks like a security, then it's likely a security. And really, there's no problem with it being a security as long as you register as a security. The problem comes when you're operating and the SEC says, hey, you're a security and you're not registered. You need to do something about it or you'll be penalized. Now, with that comes also KYC, know your customer. KYC is like an identity and background check for the clients who want to use either your platform or your services. Some countries require have a mandatory KYC before you are able to take on customers. Some of those countries are the UK, United States, and the other one is Australia.
India's
Now,
doing it now as well.
India is too. Is it mandatory in India?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, India is moving forward with cryptocurrency, and it's doing pretty good so far, at least
And
from what
it's
I
it's the
know.
world's biggest population as of a couple weeks ago too, apparently. So yeah, it's interesting.
You want to take it away from here, Josh? Talk about a little bit about FTC, BSA, and AML.
Sure. So I was talking to Nicole a bit earlier, and we were talking about this idea of all these acronyms. There are roughly 500 federal agencies that do a lot of different things. And ultimately, you're going to see several that are the key areas here, like SEC and FTC. But you have to be familiar enough to know that the biggest thing that the United States government in the United States is doing is trying to prevent money laundering, and they're also trying to make sure that when you're transmitting money that you're doing so in a legal way, and more specifically that you are not part of like an exposed person list or part of an OFAC ban, which would make the transaction problematic worldwide. So ultimately, what most jurisdictions are looking at is the transaction legal, and are the people that are involved in the transactions legal as well. Once you know those two things, then most of the federal agencies that you're going to be looking at are most likely going to be SEC and FTC, possibly something like the FBI, but there's so many in the United States, and outside the United States you're going to have all sorts of other acronyms, and ultimately that is why you have attorney whisperers like us that deal with cryptocurrency and these markets in the best way we know how, by giving good advice, because there's no way that anybody, even a good attorney, is going to know every single law. That's something that is a misnomer with attorneys, that we like sit and read code while we enjoy breakfast on Saturday. I don't know any attorney that does that. I would think that they were kind of sick in the head, honestly. So be aware, have learn enough to have some good conversations and to ask good questions, because that will help you in your investing, journey, if that's the
Yeah,
maybe the best way to put it.
definitely. And I think, Josh, one of our main hallmarks to do, like as a crypto attorney and as an attorney in general, but more so when you're a crypto attorney, is every single day you have to stay on top of the news, on top of reports, because for me at least, I like to always establish a plan of action with my
There's so
clients.
much daily.
So much, and oftentimes I like to be very clear, and I tell them, hey, this is the plan of action, but at some point overnight I might tell you that this plan of action is no longer good to go because there's been a change somewhere, and we can't do this anymore, and we have to like reboot everything and start from zero, or just change the strategy for something that is now applicable, that was not applicable like last night, for instance.
Yeah, there was just a FinCEN final rule that just came out a couple weeks ago, and it changed. It looks like it changed who like beneficial ownership status on corporations like dramatically overnight.
Yep, and
And
that's
if
that's the crypto world for us
right,
and for everyone, really.
right. So there's a lot of things to be aware of, and there's a lot of time to be spending on it. Um, the biggest question a lot of people have when it comes to crypto is the idea that you have a crypto token, which is Bitcoin, it's ETH, it's these things that, if I have one ETH, is it, exchangeable for another ETH? And the general answer is yes. One ETH is exactly the same to something else. An NFT is slightly different. There are um, in the NFT space, a NFT is unique, or at least semi-unique. It's a it's not actually drastically different from a token. There's just a lot less of them. Um, so what that means is, am I dealing with stuff in the same way? Maybe. Now, why are there questions about it? This is like what Nicole was talking about earlier of fractionalization of NFTs. This is an NFT being a title to a home, and maybe it has tokenization underneath of it where everybody has 1% of the home. That very much looks like a security, right? In that situation, it probably is a security. And even though they made this really neat project, it ultimately, you need to be thinking about the law as well. One of the big questions in the past year has also been the idea of the environmental impact of NFTs. NFTs initially, when they came out, had a lot of people like, oh my God, you're ruining the world. And at the time, they used a lot of electricity, a lot of energy, and that had a lot to do with the Ethereum chain. The chain has changed actually just recently, but at the time, there was also a lot of looks on other chains on how to create NFTs on other chains, like on Tezos, on Polygon, on Solana, and each one of those use a whole lot less electricity. And ultimately, the amount of electricity that was originally used for an NFT they argued that it was roughly equivalent to what a house would use for an entire year, a single family. Now an NFT is equivalent to a taking a step, from as a human taking one step, 1 foot. So there's much less impact on the environment. And when you hear people talking about NFTs being harmful to the environment, they read a news story 18 months ago, and that's all they ever read. Now, there's also a big question on a lot of social media that all NFTs are Ponzi's or frauds. And the real analysis there is, if you're going to say all NFTs are Ponzi's or frauds, then that also means that all corporations are Ponzi's or frauds, all banks are Ponzi's or frauds, and they each have their feelings that are, hey, I don't like that thing, it doesn't feel right. But with that being said, there's a lot of really neat NFT projects that are artwork that don't make any promises, which very specifically is not a Ponzi or fraud. It's just, hey, I made art for everybody. I hope you all like it. But then when they start creating some neat stuff, there's projects that are designed to do a certain thing, whatever that is, to give you access to a membership, to give you access to physical product once they create that physical product. There's 100 different things that these NFTs are being made for now, and probably a lot more than 100, probably 1,000 or a million. But ultimately, they're just another form of business, and they are just a way for people to ultimately make an audience, which they call community in the NFT world, which is really an audience, and to transact business in a new way. There's a lot of new things that are going to be coming out in NFTs, including what are called soul-bound tokens, which are like a university giving you your graduate degree in an NFT instead of a piece of paper, because it's less environmentally harmful at this point than a piece of paper.
You could probably
Um,
has. You can also just find it easier in the blockchain in the ledger.
I would think so. Well, the whole thing is like, look at LinkedIn, right? Like, just as somebody says they went to Harvard, doesn't mean they went to Harvard. An
True.
NFT prevents that because you're literally able to see, oh, Nicola Foss, she went to this university. In fact, you could issue NFTs for this conversation that we're having now for everybody that was here, and people would be able to see, oh, I remember seeing Josh all those years ago. He still wears those dumb green glasses.
Yeah.
And that is something that you can't do in pre-NFT world. Like, everybody that went to Woodstock would love to be able to say, I have verifiable proof I was at Woodstock. That didn't exist until NFTs. Now, modern, the world of today, you're going to be able to say, I have verifiable proof of the things that I'm telling you I've done. And that's what soulbound NFTs can do.
Yeah, and so another thing about NFTs and what makes it different, like speaking of like pre NFT world, is so for instance, I'm a personal fan of Steve Aoki. Steve Aoki has a collection of NFTs where if you have one of the
Crazy story.
NFTs, right?
Yeah.
If you have one of Steve Aoki's NFTs, you're able to go to his concerts for free. You just show like your wallet on the front line, and you'll be able to go to each one of his concerts for free. Now, personally, I think people should always know what they're buying when they're buying an NFT. Meaning, if you buy an NFT, I think most of the time people think that buying the NFT means you're buying the image that comes with it, or you're buying the song or the document or whatever you have on that NFT. So NFT by definition is non-fungible token. It's a token. It's a token embedded in the blockchain that is separate from the art that comes with it. And what this separation means is what you're paying for is the token. You're having, as part of the token, an image that you can freely display and show to your friends and use in a personal way. But commercializing the art that comes together with this NFT comes with very specific legal rights, like intellectual property rights, like copyright, like licensing. So if you buy an NFT, you need to be aware that when you need to be aware of what the purpose of buying this NFT is. Like in my case, I like Steve Aoki. I want to go to his concerts, and the reason I buy his NFT is because of that. But if you're buying an NFT, for instance, because you want to commercialize it, you want to make your business the image that comes with this token, then you have to make sure that at a minimum you have the license to commercialize. Because the thing is that you buy an NFT, then you start commercializing and you make money, like crazy amounts of money. When you make crazy amounts of money, someone is going to come after you and say or ask, "Hey, by the way, do you have a right to commercialize this? Do you have a license? Did you obtain the intellectual property of it? Do you have a copyright?" And if the answer is no, guess what? You lost that business because now your business has an image that you can no longer use because you never had the right to commercialize this image that comes with the NFT. The same goes with the song, with the document, the script, whatever. The token is separate from the art itself, and they both have different legalities around it. What you own is the token. That's what you paid for. But that doesn't mean that you paid for the art or the rights to commercialize that art. Right, Josh, do you have any more comments regarding that?
No, I think for a base conversation, it's probably a good amount of information for people to digest. I would say, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Nicole or I. You can find both of us on Twitter, on in LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. It does give you a little bit of analysis and ability to determine whether the person you're talking to is full of crapola or not.
Yeah.
So I would say definitely make sure that you're looking at people, looking at their LinkedIn. LinkedIn's not foolproof, but it's pretty decent. There is a question: why should we use Solana ecosystem for development, as it got hacked and restarted approximately 5 times? Solana is an interesting chain. It's got a lot of finance put into it, and ultimately dollars do fix a lot of ills if you're talking about like programming. Eventually I assume that they will get a lot of those ills fixed. With that being said, the restarted, it doesn't actually get restarted, it gets stopped, and a la what just happened with Binance last week.
Mm.
So anytime you have a centralized chain, they do have the ability to stop it to prevent continuing assets from like being drained, which is exactly what Binance did. So Solana is not the only chain that has stopped. In fact, there was a big problem on Ethereum several years ago, and the same exact thing happened. And that ended up creating a fork of Ethereum, which created Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So it's not just Solana, it is a growing pain of blockchain. And ultimately, if you like what they're doing on Solana, I don't know that I personally would get too upset that they've had some growing pains, but it's definitely something to think about. As do I want to be on the most stable thing right now? The most stable thing is probably ETH, even though they just changed to proof of stake. There's another question, Nicole. When you buy real estate in the metaverse, like Snoop Dogg,
Mm.
who owned it before? Is it like a tokenized NFT?
So it's not like a token. I mean, I guess it is, right? It is like a tokenized NFT, but like who owned it before? It's a tricky question because who owned it before? You mean who owned it before Snoop Dogg bought it? I guess is the question. When you buy a real estate in the metaverse like Snoop Dogg, who owned it before? The platform who created this metaverse, in theory, owned it before. If there hasn't been any previous sellers before Snoop Dogg, so it's it's a the way I see it in layman's term is like it's a recreated world in a digital form where someone, a group of people, or an entity created this metaverse, this virtual world, and decided to plot lands, give certain benefits like, hey, I know there's a project who has a Vegas strip in it, has slot machines in it, so they recreated Vegas in the metaverse. So the same way you can recreate Vegas, you can recreate a whole city. And one of those recreated cities is the city where Snoop Dogg bought his property. But before Snoop Dogg, it really doesn't have an owner per se. The owner would be the creator of that metaverse. Josh, you got any opinions on that?
I think the question is more a question of logistics. It's like when you build a house, you may want to know who built the house, but generally speaking, the person who built the house, while they may be a property development company, nobody really thinks of them as the first owner. The first owner is the first person who has the name of the title in the house, and
Hmm.
that would be similar to the metaverse. Actually, most things in crypto are very, very similar to the real world, despite the fact that our brains all kind of melt when you start talking about these new terms.
Sure. So we have another question here. This one is Honduras focus. Is it legal to fractionalize crypto assets and sell them solely in Honduras to a non-US person? So it is legal. Um, in the sense that it's not regulated and it's not prohibited. So you can definitely fractionalize this crypto asset and sell it to a non-US person. The thing is, where is your company, like where's your company located? Like the example that I mentioned earlier is, say if this scenario has a US based company and you're investing, this crypto investment is in Honduras, then probably you have to abide by US Securities and Exchange Commission laws in regards to fractionalization, which in such case you have to register as a security. That is the US scenario. That then in Honduras scenario, because we also have to comply with Honduran law, then selling these NFTs to Hondurans in Honduras to non-US person would have would have to follow any laws that are domestic from Honduras that you could potentially apply to this transaction. And this is tricky because you need an attorney who understands Honduran domestic law, who understands crypto transaction, and who understands the implication of this venture back to the United States legislation.
The next question, it looks like it's, are crypto investors required to pay capital gains in Honduras? If so, what is the rate? And are there ways to lower the rate of capital gains tax?
So I guess that's a question for me. As
I
of
would think
now,
so.
so as of now, there is no requirement to pay capital gains in Honduras. Um, but like, if you continue to say you have your crypto venture, as long as you keep your crypto venture within cryptocurrency and you don't turn it into fiat, then it should not be considered capital gain according to domestic Honduran law, the same way it would happen in the United States. So it becomes capital gain as soon as you transfer it into domestic or local currency. Then you have to pay taxes on it. But if you keep your venture within cryptocurrency, then you should be fine. Josh, you have a different, maybe a different approach from US perspective?
The only thing, and we would have to get an actual tax attorney in here to make sure that my
Sure.
memory serves correctly. But my understanding is even if you change like ETH to another token on the ETH chain, you may at that point in time have had a taxable event. So you want to make sure that wherever you live, that you know that you're talking to people, or in the alternative that you're figuring out a way to deal with those questions exactly as you said. Is there a way to lower it? And sometimes there is. The next question is, currently, are there any requirements to conduct KYC or AML in Honduras specifically? I would assume that's for you as well.
Well, actually, so here's the thing, guys. Because Honduras, and this will apply to any other country that has no crypto legislation in place, is you would apply, you would like to follow a country who has a crypto legislation in place and mirror that conduct, because that would look, at the end of the day, that would look like it's a good faith approach from your side, because you're trying to stay within the parameters of what other countries who have regulations are doing. That said, the question again is, currently, are there any requirements to conduct KYC or AML in Honduras? The short answer is no, there's not. However, if you're operating in Honduras with crypto transactions, and these transactions involve citizens who are in other countries and who are operating within the crypto transactions in Honduras from other places that are outside the Honduran territory, then you probably want to check those jurisdictions and their regulations as to KYC and AML, because most likely you will be required to have KYC for those countries. Although Honduras doesn't have a requirement, you're still dealing with other jurisdictions that do require that. So it's like a chain reaction. If one of those countries does require KYC, then you want to apply it to the other country that follows that probably does not require it. You want to stay within that realm.
Next question. As you know, Ethereum merged with proof of stake. Should we use Ethereum for development or Solana? What are your recommendations? The very first question I would have, obviously, as an attorney, we always come back with questions, is your programmers, are they familiar with C++ or are they familiar with Rust? If they're familiar with C++, they may want to program in Ethereum for ease of use. If they're familiar with Rust because they've been programming for video games, they may want to think about Solana. Once you get past those two initial questions, then I'm going to have 100 more questions for you on what you're trying to create, what you're trying to build, and more specifically for who you're trying to build it. The overall gist of the market right this second is Ethereum is huge. It has the most transactions that are happening on a daily basis. And for a lot of people, that makes it the no-brainer as far as where they're going to start a project. With that being said, there's benefits to being on Solana as well. So those are questions that I think are actually better suited to a consultation than in this room, because unfortunately, to really give you an answer, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked back.
So we have one more time for one more questions, and that is how dynamic NFT is different from a static NFT. So a dynamic NFT is an NFT that will change. It has its metadata is drafted in a way that it will change within time depending on what it's programmed for. So that's a scenario of if this happens, then what? So for instance, if your daughter turns 18, then she'll receive my Board Ape Yacht Club NFT. If my daughter, I don't know, never marries, then she shall not have my NFT from Gary Vee, for instance. So that's a dynamic NFT. It changes depending on the circumstances that you prefer or program it to behave as. Or a nice example that I like is automatization of legislation of arbitration procedures. So, say you have an award that is an award has been rendered, but you want to execute it. So, a condition could be if an award is rendered, then its execution should follow. And then you have, say, the funds could be in cryptocurrency, and the dynamic NFT is programmed to release those funds to the person that you decide to those funds to go. And a static NFT is the traditional NFT, like an image of a picture, a photograph, a song, and you have like the traditional NFT that does not change within time. It just stays has a utility that you bought it for, and that's pretty much it. Joshua, you want to give a couple of last words before we finish up?
Everybody, I would just like to say thank you for your time. Thank you for having spent a little bit of your afternoon with Nicole and I. Again, this is where you can reach both of us. I'm that Josh on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. You can also catch me on podcasts under Non-Fungible Counsel. And I am Josh. I like to tell people that I am Non-Fungible Counsel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Josh, for being here. Thank you, everybody. You have our contact information. If you have any follow-up questions, you want to reach out, please feel free to do so. Josh and I live in LinkedIn pretty much every day. That's our Outlook email, and we're very easy to reach. So thank you all. Appreciate your time. Have a good one. Happy Friday. Bye.